So we're doing a three-part series to begin to introduce the new body of work called the Five Maturities, and it grew out of for those of you who are coming for the first time, it grew out of a group of folks in the UK that wrote a paper about trying to find a way to build some competencies for team coaching, and they referenced a paper I'd written quite a long time ago, and I thought, well, maybe I should write some more about this, and so I did. And one thing led to another, and then we end up with this fairly large report on the future of coaching. And so we want to just give you just sort of a sample of kind of what's involved in this. And yeah, and so there's sort of three, if I just put the slides up for just 1 second, just so we can see this part of it. There's a three pieces of the puzzle here for today. Here we go. And then I'll take them back down again in a minute. But so we're going to just talk a bit about why the focus on maturity is important, what are the five maturities, and then we're going to show you one of the tools that we've created about figuring out how to focus your development around an area of maturity that might be useful for you. But before we do that, I want to just give you an opportunity to just take a minute and reflect on what brought you here. And just give you a minute to think about, like, what is your curiosity? What is your question? What is your hope? And just take a minute, and then when you're ready, just put something in the chat box so we get sort of a group consensus of what brought you here. And we can sort of have your voices present in our chat room at least. Find myself surrounded by a whirlwind of change and disruption. Welcome to modern life, Christopher. Yeah. Mm. Mm. All right. Mm. Mm. Yeah, I love your comment, Indigo. It's like maturity used to be sort of equated with finishing schools and a variety of other things.
Yes.
That's wonderful. Mm. All right. Cool. All right. Go back to share. So thank you for sharing, and I hope you've had a chance to kind of browse these as they've been showing up.
And
Is there somebody who'd like to speak? And there was just a random voice coming from the ether. So let me just share the screen again because I want to share a couple of pieces of content for us to kind of take this conversation further. And then we'll give you a chance to have some conversations in some small groups, just to kind of make it a more intimate experience for you. So here we are again. So, so I just thought about why is this so important? And there's 1,000 reasons I could have put here. I just picked three of them. So the first one is that uh, I think we live in a time of sort of increased distractions, increased demands on our time and attention and energy. It's harder to kind of find paths forward sometimes. We often feel less connected than we would like to ourselves, to each other, to nature. We seem to be quite ingenious in finding ways to divide ourselves. And that sort of coherence we might have taken for granted, maybe in part in the past feels less true or less available now. Um, and again, it sort of leads to a lot of more polarities. And so part of my interest in the five maturities is really around the notion of alchemy. Can we find third spaces that allow us to kind of help dissolve some of the energy that's now trapped in these polarities and not very helpful? And this whole notion of these singularities, like we keep trying to push forward and on technology with always asking ourselves the bigger questions about why, and is this actually making our life better or not? Um, and then lastly, this notion I've been really exploring that in the past, you could sort of imagine it if you squinted hard enough, the destination of where to take your career, where to take your life or your relationship. And those things seem more challenging now. And it's kind of hard to know, like, what will coaching be like in 5 years? And how will I earn money in 5 years? And what will the world be like at that point in time? And how could I get ready for that now? And so one of the images that I've been working with a lot is to give up the fantasy that we can build new bridges because we don't even know uh, where to point and where this is going. And it's evolving in a way that the image that's really come to me now is this idea of sort of getting, sort of feeling into sensing what we feel is coming, building a pylon like one of the pillars of the Golden Gate Bridge, gathering there and saying, what do we notice now? So one of the big pieces in this work is around um, relinquishing our attachment to competency models, which presume somewhat a very mechanistic view of development, which is quite useful when people begin things to know kind of what are the basics that are required. But in the end, don't do anywhere near what we need to create the maturity, let alone the mastery to build new bridges. And so part of it is beginning to explore through these kind of conversations and through the work together of how do we mature ourselves to be able to meet people in the spaces that they are now and the things they bring to us now and work with us on now. What does that mean for us about how do we care for ourselves? How do we evolve ourselves? How do we position ourselves to find ways that are, I think, a better fit for the time that we live in. And for me, that has far more to do now about maturity than acquiring more books or um, pieces of information. And so I want to show you, just as a sort of a taste of where this is all heading, is I spent some time in the paper, if you've not seen it, sort of building a model for what it might be, how we might use the five maturities in coaching. So I wanted to share this with you just to give you a flavor for what this is all about. And then in a minute, we're going to give you a chance in some small groups to practice this. But it came down to a couple of things. One is that if you look at all the research on outcomes in, say, things like psychotherapy or coaching, I'm imagining it's going to be the same for things like training and teaching, that the biggest single variable by far is the person being coached or the person being taught. But we do almost nothing really in a lot of our development processes and our ways of thinking about, say, for example, coaching. It's much more about the development of ourself, which is good too. But in reality, for me, if we're going to work with where the data takes us, our fundamental job and our fundamental measure of the success of our work is the capacity of the client and how is that better and different than when they started. And so then what does that mean for us in terms of how do we bring our clients on board with this journey and sort of decenter ourselves? So one of the outcomes of the five maturities is, I think, going to be the evolution of new forms of practice that are much more integrative in nature and much more collaborative in nature than the ones we have now. So if you have two humans, our first and fundamental maturity is our capacity as human beings to be in the relationship, to be in the work, and to evolve ourselves to do the best we can at that. The second thing that we bring is that we're in relationship together. The second most significant variable is the relationship between the people involved. I think of this as spiritual maturity, not in a religious connotation, but more in terms of spiritual practices tend to enhance our clarity, whether it's in mindfulness or meditation or prayer or whatever it is that you do. And part of what the relationship does is it takes us out of ourself to see ourselves in relationship with another human being or another human beings. And part of our role as practitioners is can we be as clear and clean as possible in that relationship so we see what's happening and we can invite the client to do the same. So a lot of what we're doing is what I think of as creating and offering a loving mirror with a memory. Um, and so in that context, if you could please mute yourself wherever you are, that would be great. Um, so in that relationship, you're now bringing skills to bear on this, and you're involved in the process together. Originally, when I first created the model, I looked at our professional maturity as the skills, but then I realized that really the entry into a profession is, do I understand the basics of the processes I've been asked to engage in? So this is the maturity that we recognize the most. It's why we take trainings and programs on coaching, for example. It's the essential elements of being together and the agreement on how these people want to work together. In that space together, then our skills are defined not by competencies because we can do them, but on capabilities and can we use them well and appropriately in the context of those two humans in that relationship in those moments in time in service of the process that you're in. And then lastly, this whole idea of contextual maturity, which is the ability to see all of these at the same time. And our credibility then is our ability to articulate what we think is happening and why, and our ability to make our best effort to achieve outcomes with our clients. And so it's the ability to move in and out of all these dimensions to see where do I need to be and how do I need to be with my client at this time to help them evolve themselves in each of these domains so that not only are they doing good work in this session, say in coaching or in a workshop, but they're now better off than they were before, such that they have a much higher probability of actually doing something with this when they're done. The last thing I'll say about this is that, let's say two things I'll say. One is that these happen symbiotically. It's not like we're over here all perfect and done doing this to the client, that you're co-creating this space together. You're creating what in attachment theory we think of as moments of meeting, where your current way of working is not sufficient to what's just emerged. So both you and the client need to evolve in the moment to show up and take advantage of that opportunity. The second thing that I'll say about this is that for me, it really then helps us to think very differently about how we develop ourselves, and more importantly, if you again look at the research about client factors for their success, what happens in, say, a coaching session or in a training session is a fraction of what the person actually needs to make the change that they desire. So one of the things I think is coming, why this work I feel is so vital, is through technology, through ways of reformatting our practices, we actually need to spend more time with our clients where they need us most, which is understanding all the upstream things that are affecting their ability to be or do what they want, but also be more present to them downstream, where all the hard work starts, which is actually to implement or integrate what they did with you when they were actually working with you, say, for example, in the session. And so for me, a lot of what this implies is sort of decentering our sessions, making more time, energy, and resource available to support people, to scaffold people, so they can actually make the changes that they're seeking. I'm going to stop there and just see if you have any thoughts or questions that you'd like to raise, um, and then I'm going to give you an opportunity to have some breakout rooms together. So if you've got a question, you're welcome to either put your hand up or to put yourself in the chat box with your question. So Laurel, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I'm curious on your drawing here, why it goes client relationship skills or coach relationship, or
Yeah.
instead of client coach skills relationship.
Because your skills don't matter unless they're in service of the relationship and the process.
Haha.
And so, in my original view, I took that more traditional approach. But then I realized again, we obsess about competencies. Like, for example, many coaches are told you have to be able to ask, and you have to ask lots of powerful questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that is a good skill sometimes. And actually asking questions may not be useful at all. And I often and some of you in my class will know, the narrative coaching students every year for 20 years ask me, can I have the list of the top 20 narrative coaching questions? No, you can't, because I could give you one, but those questions could be brilliant or awful depending on what the person actually needs from you. So I wanted to like actually draw the picture to map sort of an order of priority, what I think makes the most difference for our client, and help our skills be filtered through an awareness of that person, of ourselves, of the relationship we formed. What of my skills would be most useful for them right now?
So we choose the skills based on the relationship and the moment.
Yes. So yes, exactly. Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So again, some of the skills that we wouldn't even think of as coaching skills. And so even if you have somebody that's really, maybe they've just lost their job, or they've got to give the biggest presentation of their life, they don't really need coaching. They just need love, reassurance, presence, a boost of confidence. None of which would be considered traditional coaching skills, for example, but might be exactly what they need.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, again, I think we over focus on skills, and we don't focus quite enough on the container of the relationship itself. So, Christopher.
Yeah, just looking at the model, I was wondering if I was to place the field
Yeah.
as the dynamic between coach and client, would that be basically the white space around the model?
So I myself, and again, I just for trying to keep this as simple as possible. In many ways, the field is sort of constellated in that moment in time. So again, there is that sense of the gestalt of the conversation. It all represents a field, but I'm most interested in this moment in time, yeah, with the client. What's showing up here? And again, going back to what you were observing, Laurel, um, I don't know until that moment arises which of my skills is going to be most useful. Um, and yes, so there's part of us in these processes where we're tracking the whole of what's happening. But the main thing for me is if we have sufficient contextual maturity, we'll be able to hold this whole thing relatively at the same time. Then ask ourselves, who and how do I need to be right now to kind of move us in the direction of what we sense is trying to happen here, that the client might find of value. Um, does that work for you, Christopher? All right. And Robert, did you have a question?
Just a brief comment. I'm going to make it real brief because this is why I love this work so much, that it questions the fundamental assumptions that we run our lives by, which don't seem to be working too well these days. And so it's maybe a good idea to question those fundamental assumptions that everybody knows that's the way it is.
Yeah.
If they're not working, thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I really appreciate that. Is there anybody else that would like to share? Oh, let's see. Let me take this down for a second and find the chat box, see if there's anything in here. Funny growing up. Thanks, Karen. Yeah. All right. Anybody else for right now? Okay. So here's what I'd like you to do. I'll put this back up again. And yeah, I'm going to just show you that. What is this here? We don't need that. I'm going to, if I can get this to cooperate, I had this earlier for the other class before this. The arrows disappear. So let's start this and stop this again. There we go. Get these all set up. Okay. Great. And we'll give you 30 minutes. Okay. All right. So I'm going to open up the rooms in a minute, but what I want to show you this first before we do that. Hope it'll let me do that this time. Let's give it a whirl. There we go. Okay. So, so we created this little thing called, oh, Marco, you raised your hand.
Yes, just a question.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. In the first picture, what about the system? It seems only client and coach, but it's also a system inside. So it's around, it's behind.
Well, I would guess right now that's just focusing on the exchange, but they're embedded in a much larger system around them. So the coach comes from a system, the client comes from a system. And again, I think that our new forms of practice are going to be much more focused on what people do after the session. So asking ourselves, what is the environment the person is returning to?
Okay, so we concentrate inside.
Yes.
Okay.
So again, a lot of the research I've been doing and reading about learning and development is that we for a long time we had this whole notion of, if I just create a perfect practice environment and let somebody practice, like doing a role play or an exercise, that they'll be able to do that back in the real world, which doesn't happen. That translation often gets hugely mucked up. And so a lot of this work is doing, as we do in narrative coaching, doing much more around creating experimentation in the session so that people have real lived experience of whatever they're trying to learn in real time and can get feedback in real time. And the transfer of that to their actual environment becomes much more meaningful. So here's what I would like you to do. I divided you into groups. And if you would like, you could just take a picture of this if that helps you. It might be useful to you. And what I'm going to ask you to do is just to, as best you understand this is not a quiz, but just sort of feel into each of these sort of 5 dimensions. So in each of these sort of sets of 5, there's sort of a primary aim. So working with spiritual maturity increases your capacity to see clearly what's actually happening. So you have a much clearer and more honest view of what's going on. You see more, going back to Marco's point, you see the embeddedness of the relationship, not just the one you're in, but the broader relationships. And within our work, it's thinking about it in terms of our aspiration. What are we trying to do here? And so each of these has a gift that we bring to the work that we're doing. Each of these has a gift for our clients in terms of what they need to focus on. And again, part of why I'm creating this matrix is because I think we often overwhelm our clients with too many expectations and too much to focus on and too much to do. And this is a way for me to begin to feel, to explore where could we begin to pay attention that might be useful. So for example, you have somebody you're coaching and they want help because they've got a really difficult manager and they don't know how to talk to them and they want some coaching about how to talk to them, which is a typical and a noble intention for coaching. However, in that, they're assuming that everything that's going wrong in that relationship is the manager's fault. So what they might benefit from some spiritual maturity in this sense of, can you see the ways in which you contribute to or collude to the problems you're complaining about? Can you sharpen your understanding of your current relationship with your manager and how it got to be that way? Why is developing a better relationship with your manager valuable to you? What are you hoping to achieve there? And what happens is people then start to have to take more accountability, like, oh, now that I think about it, I can see ways in which I make my manager's life more difficult, or how our styles are different, or our learning preferences are different. Oh, I can see why that would be a challenge for him or her. And so what I'm going to invite you to do in your small groups is kind of look at these and again, feel into them in a way that works for you. Again, this is not a class to teach you all of this. It's just to introduce a frame. So if you think about, I'd like to have you think about something that you're working on in your own life and practice right now. Like, so for example, for me, I'm midway through a multi-month move from North America to Europe. So one of the things I've had to do is really focus down on details in a way that I don't often like to. And so some of the competencies that I don't normally have to deploy in my life, I've had to do a lot more in that space to navigate bureaucracies and governments and logistics and the like. So I'm going to invite you in your group is just for a few minutes, reflect on whatever it is you're working on for yourself. And does one of these 5 segments speak to you in some way, in whatever way is meaningful for you? And I would encourage you in your group to make sure you have enough time, which you should with 30 minutes, for everybody to have a chance to just talk to what comes up for you when you think about your dilemma or your ambition, that one of these might help give you some thought or some lens on where you might want to focus some attention or energy to be able to do something about this. Okay? Are there any questions about this before I send you into your breakout rooms? If so, just put up your hand and we'll address them. Let's see here. All right. All right. Wonderful. All right. I'm going to put you in breakout rooms. I will see you in 30 minutes. Enjoy your conversations. All right.
Okay.
So I'm going to leave the slides down for now and just check in. You're again welcome to put anything you'd like in the chat box. And if you'd like to share any reflections from your brief encounters as novices with the Matrix and see what, if anything fabulous came up for you. As you're thinking about that, for those of you who don't know me, one of my greatest inspirations for this work are 5-year-old skiers, and who are passionate about skiing, and the adults worry too much about how they look and if they're going to hurt themselves, and they're there to learn how to ski. And so a lot of this is really about allowing ourselves to explore something we may not even totally understand, rather than having to be taught this for hours and hours before you feel qualified to have this conversation.
To
So,
test.
He's been waiting for a minute.
I'm gonna figure out some.
Hello.
Christopher, did you figure out how to mute everybody? Mine doesn't seem to be showing up.
Oh, that would be great.
You need to mute everyone, and then you need to unmute yourself.
I
Otherwise,
know,
you
but
are also on
I'm
mute.
not, the
You
controls
can
on.
make me co-host, and I can do it manually. I can try
Excellent.
to do it manually.
Yeah, because for some reason, now I gotta find you. The
I'm
controls
here.
are acting wonky. Here you are. Okay, now I'm gonna find you. Christopher. Anybody else has a question or thought while I'm looking for, there he is. Okay, there you go. So you can take care of that. So for all the people with excitement in their background, we can let them enjoy that. But anybody want to share anything from your conversations that feels important to you?
Sure, I'll share a short something. David,
Great. Natan, yeah.
Um, well, I got drawn to the behavior part of the wheel as for
Yeah.
the example I chose in our conversation, and what I found quite quickly as I had the model this drawing in my periphery, and as I spoke about the issue, is I found myself constantly saying, "Oh, but that ties into mindset, and that ties into aspiration, and that ties into this," and yeah, it's just a very short observation that
Yeah,
obviously they're all very interconnected and one feeds the other. And we can
yeah,
choose one place to start or a way in to focus on, but they're all going to influence each other.
correct. And to Amy's comment in the chat box, um, you don't have to fully understand the model to do this. And yes, everything connects to everything. But what I'm part of why I'm trying to do this is we talk about these words like mastery or maturity and these global terms, but it doesn't really help us understand what to do about that. And you can't really teach maturity other than paying attention to life. And so I'm trying to find ways to link what we do and how we see ourselves together, and knowing full well that they are connected, but it gives us a point of focus. And if I've got a brief period of time, or, maybe I'm about to do something really important, but I'm not feeling as prepared as I thought. I had an occasion right before this class, I had a client engagement, and the sponsor of the event was supposed to talk for an hour, and I was only supposed to talk for an hour, and she talked for 5 minutes and said, "It's over to you, David." So I'm like whizzing around my own wheel. I think, oh crap, well, now what am I supposed to do now? But then, of course, you have to be smiling because you're on camera and you have to pretend like you have everything together. But in reality, I'm thinking, I don't, I, I have plenty to say, but the whole point of this was for them. Anyways, it's interesting. So just as a way for us to help focus our attention. Anything for anybody else for right now? Marion, I see you flagging me down there.
Yeah, thank you. I never seem to be able to find a hand to raise, so I have to wave. One of the things that occurred to me in our conversation is that we seem to, if you take the circle, and then
Yep.
Chris was asking about the green dot at the middle, we have all these arrows going out. It seems to me that the dynamic nature of what's going on inside all of that, and how different aspects come to the fore at different parts as we're sliding along that scale from contributing to coping,
Yeah.
is a very dynamic and moving space.
Yeah. And so a really common scenario would be, you recognize that you've learned a lot of skills. Maybe you've just been through a program. You've learned a lot of new skills, but you don't feel very confident in them yet. You don't feel very grounded in them yet. And so their maturity is not there to use them wisely yet. And then you go out and you try a few things and it doesn't go very well, but then you could use the matrix to realize, oh, I picked a really difficult environment to try this in, right? I made it harder for myself than was useful. Maybe I should go try using this on people that love me and will support me while I try this for the first time. And so again, it's really just as we're moving moment to moment, trying to understand how to evolve ourselves, it just provides some language and structuring for focus for right now. And then that one thing will then kind of lead to the next. Chris, and then Marco, and then I'd like to share a couple more pieces with you.
Thank you very much. And thanks to Michelle and Laurel for being my companions. Picking up on what's been said, what popped into mind is to actually now see this in motion and more like the particles going around the nucleus of an and all the forces interacting. And so the green dot, that caused our attention. Exactly what Michelle said. It's the dot that got me. And then the phrase from T.S. Eliot about the still point turning universe.
Yeah.
Just now to see this whole thing in motion struck me as so liberating and so exciting.
Thank you.
To just bring it into the fact that Laurel was saying, we don't have to know this as a top-down model. We can experience from the bottom up of all these interactions with clients, and then step back and say, oh, that was that particle a little bit. That was the one that had attention and intention. But to come back to the green dot of our centered still point around which all this moves just warms my heart.
That's great. I hadn't quite thought of it that way, but it makes complete sense. So one of the ways I use this a lot, even in my own life, as I try to experiment with this and find better ways to teach it and use it, is I use this a lot when I find myself on the brink of conflict, or I recognize I just said something that probably wasn't quite the way I meant it, or it's misheard or whatever, and you can see the formation of the swell of a potential conflict. And then or maybe something's coming at me. And I use this a lot to say, how do I need to ground myself? What about me needs to grow in this moment to actually rise to this occasion? And so for like a quintessential position many of us take in arguments is we get attached to our need to be right. And we're afraid if we lose the argument, we'll be wrong. And so part of the maturation, if you think about spiritual maturity, is what's more important to me, the quality of the relationship or the need to have my ego be satisfied that I was right. And so for me, it's been a great sort of handbrake on, I think I see myself sliding into a conflict I can easily avoid if I just kind of show up a bit differently to allow myself to be present in the conversation in a different way. So Marco and then Betty, and then we'll
I'm reading your report, so I didn't finish. So if my question is inside the report, I will read. So you don't answer, we go on. I see the schema, and I also create a triangle.
Okay.
The identity, aspiration, and behavior. There is a triangle.
Yeah.
We connect. There is a sense that you create in this order, or is it just casualty, or there is a sense of disorder? Because if we connect identity, aspiration, and behavior, that makes sense in my mind as just a triangle, because identity in social constructivism is ego.
Yes.
But it's another identity in the spiritual part, and they create our behavior that have behind the mindset. So this is what I saw.
So if you could go all Buckminster Fuller on this and have all kinds of geometries, and I think there's all kinds of interesting combinations here. Yeah, that would be fun to play with sometime. Thank you for that. Betty, final words to you on this part, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I went into this I realized as soon as I got there, I had no clue what we were supposed to do. I knew what the topic that I was going to bring, because I know what I'm concerned about right now.
Right.
So I decided I would just try that. And the concern is that I'm going to make a mistake that I've made many times. So I realized that I've already made a mistake. And that is that I met up with some friends about a year ago. I swore to myself I would not let it go that long again. And guess what? Let it go again. So now I'm at the place where I need to call them. And of course, I feel awkward. I feel like it's, I was stupid. I shouldn't have let it. So I decided I picked, because it said relationship, I picked aspiration.
Okay.
Only because that word relationship was there, and
Mhm.
it does have to do with relationships. But I guess I don't know why that would be particularly spiritual maturity, or why that would be clarity, or what it
So,
has to do with aspiration.
yeah. So they come from different frames into that space, but it, I would see it as if you're trying to understand yourself, what are you not seeing about yourself that keeps you repeating this pattern?
Um,
What is it about how you see yourself in these relationships that might need some attention so that you can attend to this in ways that you would really like?
okay. Yeah,
And so,
I'd have to give that some thought, but
yeah,
I have some ideas about it.
great.
So thank you.
You're most welcome. Um, all right. Thanks, Kent. So let me just share the slides again, and then I will oh, here we are. So we're already right there. We'll go back here first. Um, So this was a slide I think we had last time, but it's just sort of again what I observed in our sort of performance-oriented cultures in large parts of the West and many organizations is that we assume that if we just give people more skills, more resources, more information, that somehow magically they'll get better, which sometimes can help. But what I observed that and why I kind of stopped doing a lot of what I was doing for many years was that we were assuming that more stuff would create more mastery, which was the first fallacy. And the second fallacy was that people then would know what to do with that. And what I started to realize, um, having trained in organizations for decades, was that you have very smart people who will have been to many of these programs, and yet they too feel frustrated. Why am I not getting any better? Why is this not having more impact? And I realized it's not because they need today's new trend or some new language or some new model. What they need is they don't have the what Gabor Mate called the emotional architecture. They don't have the maturity to be able to act on what they know. Um, and so it's not that they haven't been paying attention in our workshops, or that they don't have things that are useful to them in terms of strategies or tactics or templates. It's just they don't have the either something about their maturity doesn't enable them to actually naturally to do that or do that well. And so I just realized that again, a lot of what we're trying to be help people with is around how do they grow themselves such that what they're trying to achieve has a stronger foundation. And so I just want to share a couple more pieces from the report, and we'll talk some more about one of these next time. But so part of this whole piece started around coaching, but again, I think this will play out, as you'll see on the second slide, across many of these professions. So what I started to realize is during the pandemic, pretty much everybody became a coach. And the word coaching doesn't really mean, it means everything and kind of nothing now because and so I thought we need better distinctions. And so I've started playing with this as one way of thinking about how do we make distinctions in the coaching space. And and I think I put this up here both for its own value, but also to showcase, I think this is where we're going. We have a lot of blurs between boundaries and as opposed to clear distinctions. We actually are moving into a place where disciplines might need to combine some, but this was my beginning sort of step in that direction. To think about coaching as a mindset. So this could be a parent who tries to use some coaching skills to be a better parent. We have professionals, they could be attorneys, leaders, doctors, who use coaching as a means of communicating with people and helping people, for example, learn how to adopt better health behaviors. They don't need to be certified as a coach. We don't need associations for them necessarily, but they're using coaching as a means to achieve a professional end. And then we have, probably the largest group right now, which is people who actually define themselves as a coach in one way or another, either informally or formally. And these are I see as coaching as a member. The problem is that we have, in my view, we have things to belong to as a member, which actually don't really in many ways support the advancement of coaching as much as we would like. And so for me, I think one of the things we'll form is different ways of organizing people that want to be recognized as a coach professionally. And I think part of what might come there in more countries is regulations of coaching as an industry. But then there's people like myself who doesn't belong to those associations and won't ever belong to those associations, but want to be held accountable and want to continue to mature and grow in my practice. And for us, coaching then becomes a modality that it's one of many modalities I have available because I've had that available in my my practice. And in a given client, in a given encounter with a client, it could be one of the modalities I choose to adopt to service the needs of that client at that time. And I believe that's where a lot of us who have been in coaching for a long time are migrating, because we're starting to recognize coaching is one element that is valuable to our clients, but there's actually many others. And then you'll see on the next slide, and which will be the last thing for our session today, of where I think this is all going. But I think this will alleviate a lot of the anxiety of people of like coaching is getting really crowded. It's getting really kind of blurry. There's lots of sort of outdated thinking in spaces. And so this is a way in terms of what market we want to be in, how we want to identify ourselves. And I feel like these kind of taxonomies are going to become more prevalent as we try to make better distinctions about our practices. So let me just sort of summarize that with this sort of wild and crazy graphic here. So this is how I would describe, in a traditional sense, the old world in which many of us were raised or trained as practitioners. I don't think coaching is a profession. It doesn't meet already any of the criteria for a technical profession, but we'll call it one for the sake of the argument. So when we maybe change careers or start a career, we identify ourselves, I'd like to be this kind of a practitioner, an OD consultant, a coach, a psychotherapist, a trainer, a teacher, whatever. And a lot of what comes with that is a lot of instruction around how we're supposed to work and what that looks like. For many of us, it's easy to get caught up in a lot of consumption and trying to commodify things to be able to sell them. But there's a sort of this beginning of this journey as a practitioner. To continue to grow as a practitioner, we continue to prepare ourselves. But a lot of that preparation, if we're not careful, is a lot of prescribed knowledge about what already exists in the profession. What happens then, I observe, is that there's a tendency to focus on what we now know, and we end up falling into the trap of feeling like we need to diagnose things before we can use what we know. And then lastly, we need to fit in and enculturate into a profession that sort of in many ways prescribes a role to us. So we rock up and we say, hey, I'm an executive coach, or I'm a facilitator, and this sort of defines kind of who we are. And the better and better we get at this, the more skilled we are at implementing. So inherently, there's nothing wrong with any of that, right? It's how many of the professional roles of our society play out, and it has a lot of value. And I also feel like it's fading in its utility. And all you have to do is think about your last visits to the doctor to understand why. And so for me, I think what's evolving, which is what the ultimate purpose of the paper was, which is to try to find some language and curiosity about what might be coming next. And primarily for those of us who are in these fields to figure out how do we prepare ourselves for an AI-driven world, for example, as one piece of the puzzle. So what I think is coming looks more like this. So the beginning point is not our identity as a practitioner, but more about who we are as a human being. Our preparation comes first in a way, and our grounding in our maturation and our integration of everything that we know and all of who we are. That's what we're bringing to our practice. And so it's not about being, sort of a jack of all trades and a master of none. There's actually can be quite deep mastery here. but fundamentally it's, can I stand on my own and identify myself as ready to go do X? And with that, then there is a movement, I believe, towards more transdisciplinary knowledge. So collaborating, integrating with a lot of people we might not historically work with. And so what we're after then is, rather than diagnosis, is like sensing and noticing what is known about the situation I'm finding myself in. What am I seeing now through my involvement in a community that I did not see before, which leads me to then engage in dialogue. And what that ultimately means is our role is much more agile and is organized around what is needed. So rather than focusing only on implementation, maybe it is our larger gift and our larger role in the new world is on improvisation. And so the way I think about that is that when we're working this way, when we're thinking this way, we're bringing so much more of our whole self. Like, for example, you might be a master chef and you think, but now I'm a coach. Like, what does my gifts as a chef have to do with this? Well, a lot of things. So what did you learn in the course of being a master chef that, if you thought about it long enough, would actually say, hey, that actually has a lot of bearing on how I think about combining all the elements of a conversation to create a meal, or in this case, a coaching conversation. And then you might think about, rather than what do I want to do, what is actually needed in this moment in time. And so where I think is coming is that we might still belong to professions, we might still have professional identities, but we're no longer trapped in those boxes, because a lot of the things we were taught to believe, say, for example, about coaching, are not helpful to some people some of the time. So like, I give advice often in coaching because that's exactly what the client asked for in that moment in time. Is it traditional coaching? Of course not. Is it a value to that client? Yes. And so for me, the value of the 5 maturities is we have to be able to develop ourselves to find our version of what this looks like for us. And then how do we want to create institutions and forms of practice and communities to support that? So I think about, like, for example, the struggle of many districts, of school districts, to find teachers. Why? In part is because teachers now spend a significant part of their time dealing with standardized tests, which doesn't really match their mission about why they went into teaching. They spend a lot of time on issues traditionally thought of as social work, because a lot of their students come in with needs beyond the classroom. And so, but we still have this insistence that schools should look the same. If that's the reality of what teachers are doing, and we want to equip them and allow them to go work in these multi-dimensions, then we might want to reimagine and improvise what would a school look like if we actually took that seriously. So I'm just gonna stop there, and it's just, we've got a couple of minutes. I'm gonna take this down so I can see you all again. So when we come back next time for if you come visit us for the 3rd free session, we're going to spend some time helping you begin to think about what this might look like for you. And then we'll tell you about some things we've got planned for later in the year and for next year, to spend a lot more time diving deep into what an integrative practice might look like for you. But for now, I'm going to see if there's any parting comments or questions, reflections that any of you would like to share before we call it an evening. Appreciate the comments in the chat box, and maybe you all feel oh, Robert, you have something you want to share? Then we'll go to
Thank you,
JC.
David. Very, very briefly, as briefly as I can manage, that what I'm seeing is I see things from the 40,000 foot level, which is usually not in instances helpful. But in this particular question, I see your work as an implementation of what's called grounded theory, which is a new kind of methodology. And for those of you who are not familiar, it was just really discovered in the 1960s and is still not well known that our traditional research methodology is to start out with research questions or a thesis that you want to prove or disprove, and then you collect data that will support or dispute that thesis. Well, that's backwards. That what grounded theory is about is having some general idea that there's some questions that need to be asked about a particular area, and then you scurry around and assemble as much good data as you can, get all the different good verified data that you can find, look at the data, and then say, what is going on with this data? What does that tell me about this situation? That's grounded theory. It works very well for social science, not so well for physical science. But we have the physical science model that we try to apply physics and mechanics and all that kind of thing, fluid dynamics, whatever, to human relations, which doesn't work because humans don't behave according to the numbers.
No.
So
Thank you, Robert. I'm going to cut you off here so we can get to
Thank
JC,
you, I'm done.
okay? Thanks.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. JC.
David, thanks for all of this. Your metaphors are often more intricate than I appreciate at first glance. And so a naive question perhaps, but
sure.
But I keep going back to your first slide, but why are we building pylons if we don't know where the bridge goes?
Because we have to, for me, it's the closest I could come as an analogy to recognize we have some senses of, we can see through some of the fog, and we have some sense we kind of need to be moving in this direction. And all I know is that, like for me, one of my biggest quests at the moment is I'm looking for more interesting conversations. So I don't go to conferences anymore because I don't find very many interesting conversations unless it's over a beer in the bar. And so I just find it's the same stuff regurgitated again and again. So the idea of a pylon is, could we go just a few meters off the coastline and build a pylon, even if it's only just different? It may not be better, it may not be the perfect direction, and have a different conversation. And so I feel like, again, going back to my chef analogy, I feel like we're being invited as the world's deconstructing itself, or devolving, or whatever the hell it's doing, that we're being asked to put allow ourselves to decompose, deconstruct, and then see if some things might want to emerge from that. And I just feel like, if nothing else, those conversations need to happen in new places with new people.
I feel that. I feel that energy to do something, to channel, but not know the direction. I just got caught up in the pouring of the concrete and how deep we have to go to do a pylon. Maybe I'm being way too literal at this point, but anyways.
Yes, that's okay. All good. All right, we all good? All right, well, I hope this has been useful for you, and this is an adventure, and I'm so grateful that you've chosen to come walk with us for a while, and we'll be back next month with our third installment, and we'll be letting you know about some other things that are coming to dive much deeper into all this work. And for me, this is just a way to initiate a conversation, and I'm hoping that you'll come and join us. All right, thank you, and be well wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you again next time.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Adios.